Hey everybody, welcome to Villegas World. My students left off with the results of British imperialism in India, so this is where I'm going to start. While you guys are writing this down, even though you could pause it, I'm going to just interject some different facts about the British imperialism in India. Some questions you have to ask yourself are why was India considered the brightest jewel for the British? And you have to come to remember that India offered many different people that could be customers of mercantilism, that could also be workers. They also have a lot of great land to have plantations on, so the raw materials that exist in India, they can also produce and then give to Britain, and then they could resupply them as manufactured goods. So you just want to keep that in mind. You also want to think back to how did the British take down the Indian peninsula, and because look at its vastness. It's such a large subcontinent that one might say that this was too large of a place to grab, but the British did it in dividing and conquering it, and it played its differences on each other. The Muslim and Hindu, people were at odds with each other for various reasons that are mentioned in the textbook, so you can always go back to that. But the British wanted to be careful about how they handled culture in India. So at first, they did not send Christian missionaries. It wasn't until the British became confident in their imperialist nature in India that they brought these missionaries in. Also, the British that came into India started behaving badly, as some would say, in the brothels and with the dancing girls of India. So the British felt that they needed to bring Christianity back into play amongst the people of India and their merchants that were, in India. So anyway, the Sepoy Rebellion, or the Mutiny, as some would say, was pretty much started or caused by the British then starting to get rid of many of the rituals that the Indian people had faith in. And the Sepoys rebelled, and of course it doesn't end too well for the Indian people, because this is how the British really sink their teeth into India. And over time, you're going to see that the Indian people are going to rebel because it was the knowledge that they gained from the education the British are going to give to them. And funny enough, the British, as it says here in your notes, are going to be criticized for their, the way that the British were trying to put down the revolts. And, worldwide, it's going to bring attention to the movement with Gandhi that we'll see as we get closer to the 20th century. All right, I'm going to change the slide now. So the next location we're going to look at is China. In this new imperialism. And also, you got to remember, new imperialism, it's not old imperialism. So some things you might want to think about that's new about this taking over are the locations that are getting imperialized, which were China, India, Oceania, and Africa. Whereas before, you're looking mostly at Latin America and the Spice Islands. Now, in this new imperialism, Britain is always out to make a profit. Most of these imperialist countries are, of course, because that's going to give them their power. And so it's going to be all about trade. So if you look at China, you're going to notice that, this is a location that has, from ancient times, been isolationist. They have been ethnocentric, and they're not going to need anything from anybody, or so to speak, that they believe that. So China is going to have a trade surplus, and you think back to what the word surplus is, and surplus, you have an abundance of an entity. Now, in this situation where there's a trade surplus, you're going to be exporting more than importing, which means you're going to be gaining profits off of the selling of your goods because you're not buying from other people. And this gets the Westerners, aka Britain, super upset because they're going to have a trade deficit, which means they're buying more than they're selling. And hopefully you guys could take the hint from when we talked about deficit spenders of the absolutist age. Anywho, when the British realize that they have a trade deficit with China, they're going to want to try to figure out, well, what can we get these Chinese to buy from us? And unfortunately, it's going to consist of a drug called opium, which is kind of funny because the Chinese grew opium themselves, so you would think, why are the Chinese going to buy it from the British? Well, the answer is the fact that the opium that was grown in China was not as strong or potent as India was growing it. So the Chinese are going to want the bigger and badder, stronger drug, and unfortunately it's going to give them some problems. Now, before we get to the issues concerning imperialism in China, you want to think of what kind of state of mind the Chinese are in. They're being ruled by the Qing dynasty, aka Manchu dynasty, who had kept a lot of Chinese systems in place. They kept the civil service exam, they kept Confucianist ideas, they continued to put the woman down. Women inferiority was definitely increasingly happening, unfortunately, and we're going to see that as time goes on with all large empires, which you should be thinking about comparing, Ottoman Empire, Roman Empire, is in their fall. We're going to start to see the bureaucrats becoming corrupt. We're going to see taxes increasing. We're going to see social gaps happening, and social unrest. It's not going to be a place that's going to be somewhat of a golden age. So we're going to see nepotism happening, and if you don't know it, it's when people start hiring their family over skilled workers. We're going to start to see cheating on the civil service exams. So you have these rich people in power who have no clue what they're doing. They don't respect the system of Confucian ways. So unfortunately, it leads to corruption. Now, let's look at this term green China here, okay? Green China is a reference towards the area that was valuable in China. So you're looking at the coastlines, because the interior of China, it was rugged, it was vast. The Europeans weren't interested in it. They were interested in the marketplace, and they were interested in these coastal regions. So that's why the Europeans will establish little spheres of influence seen here in this map. So each color represents a different country from Europe that's going to come in and use it as a marketplace. The yellow, that's usually the area that's probably pretty much going to be not touched. So we will see Europeans competing, and if you take a look here, look at those Japanese coming in. You got to think back also to what's going on in Japan at this time. And hopefully you're thinking, Meiji Restoration, they're starting to modernize, they're starting to get with the times. So Japan saw the issue, got out of their ethnocentric isolationist zone, and started modernizing. They started restoring. Unfortunately, they did lose a lot of their culture, the samurai, their clothing, all that. And the Chinese, unfortunately, did not realize the problem, and this is what happens to China. They're getting pretty much carved up as seen in this political cartoon. And each one of these people represent a different country, which you could probably figure out for yourself. So moving on, just because I'm talking way too much and I got to get to the what's real here. I hope you're all enjoying my voice. I don't know what I sound like. I probably sound silly, but you're stuck with me for now. So here, seen in this picture, you're going to see the poppy fields. And, opium is used as an opiate today in a lot of medicine. We use, Miss K, what is it? Say it again. Morphine. There we go. Morphine. And yeah, of course it's not the original, but anywho, China is going to get this and they're going to love it. And I'm talking men, women, upper class, lower class. They're all going to participate in this drug. And unfortunately, by the time that China realizes that this is a problem, it's going to be too late. So by the time they start doing reforms, it's going to have taken on a life of its own that it can't control. Consider a person on drugs and what their life is like. They're not going to work. They're trying to function, but it's not happening appropriately in society. They're spending their money solely on the drug, and when they run out of money, they're taking it from places that they shouldn't. And this is what starts to happen to a lot of the upper echelon of China. This is what happens to a lot of the people that are involved in the government. They're taking money from the treasury to pay for these drugs. So the government already isn't running efficiently, and here we have again another situation that's bringing on the worst times in the economic status of China. Now, look at all the things that China tries to do. the Queen of England at this time, you consider her like the big boss of the drug wars here, okay? She is just as bad as Al Capone at this point. The Chinese even go to her and say, listen, please stop trading with us, pretty please. And British are like, no, we're making too much of a profit. Why would we do this? So around the early 1800s, this guy, Lin Jiashuo, or you know how I'm pronouncing things, archipelago, mercantilism. Okay, so anyway, this guy, Lin Jiashuo, starts this problem where he's like, I'm going to go and reform the ports out in China. And he goes and he gets rid of the opium, he destroys it, he starts arresting people. And of course the British are going to be like, that was our opium and you totally destroyed it, so now we're mad at you. And this is where the war takes on, really, really greatly here. And the British are going to crush the Chinese. I mean, look at the Chinese junkers in comparison to the British fleet of ships at this point. There's no way the Chinese were going to win. So the Chinese are forced to sign this Treaty of Nanjing, which is super unfair, and it's going to enter China into a really, really dark period of time. Now, before I change the slide, I want you to really think of, if you look at China and India, both locations had a massive population in comparison to Britain. So you ask yourself, if you have the majority in people, why can't you take over this little island nation? Well, both governments were in decline. They were disorganized. There's a little bit of diversity in India. The British were functioning very effectively in their government. They knew they had done this before. They knew how to enter into a country. They actually had the examples of the Dutch when we talk about the Pacific Islands and all that in a little bit. So, the British were able to be successful. All right, moving on. Here's some pictures of opium. There's the resin here that it's almost like a tar, and they're gonna burn it, and they're gonna get high. And unfortunately, this is, if you look at it this way, when the opium started entering to China, I would say around 5,000 chests were coming into China, each weighing around 130 pounds. By the time the Opium War starts, we're seeing around 40,000 chests going into China. Consider the fate of the Chinese in this situation. Here are some of the opium dens that people are going to. Again, notice the class of people. We're going from lower class to upper class. We're looking at men and women both participating in the drug. Now, as a result of the Opium War, 90 ports were open to 300,000 European merchants, missionaries, what have you. So there's no stopping this drug from entering into China. And you might be asking yourself, why are they all laying down? Folks, this is the drug that puts you into a completely euphoric state where you're just completely, you're at rest. You're no help to anybody, basically, especially when you compare them to other drugs that have high energy to it. Treaty of Nanjing, or Nanking, depending on how you see it spelled, unfortunately decimates the Chinese. So look at all these things that are happening. The British are making them pay reparations for the war, and to do that, the Chinese have to hire the taxes. So that's going to further drive their people to hating them. The biggest piece here is that Hong Kong is given to the British keep it until the 90s here. So all throughout history from this point for Hong Kong, it's going to be treated as a British entity. So what the people are learning, how the people are acting, the kind of government that they're ruled under is all going to be reflected from that of the British. And we're going to see the differences that occur and how the people have to transition into the Chinese world in the 90s as we get closer to modern history. Extraterritoriality, definitely a term that you have to know for the Regents and the AP exam. This is going to allow foreigners to live in a foreign country, however, they're still tried and pressed underneath their native country. So if you have a British coming into China, they are no longer subjected to the Chinese laws. They live under their British laws, which can also make them, in a way, feel more powerful amongst the Chinese, than they would be if they were under Chinese law. Now, I'm at 14:40 here. I only have 20 more seconds, so I'm going to pause here and start a new segment starting with the Taiping Rebellion. Thanks for listening. Ciao.